Welcome, everyone. In this session, we have Cristy Stone, Research Lead, Emerging Technology at Avanade, and Diana Wolfe, Applied Researcher, Emerging Technology at Avanade, presenting The Play is the Thing, using performing arts to create compelling digital visualizations. Just a quick note to the audience to please post your questions to the Q&A box instead of the chat. Cristy and Diana, a reminder to start your timer. Off to you.
Lovely. Thank you so much for the introduction. As mentioned, I'm Cristy Stone, and we are here to talk about The Play's the Thing, how you can apply some concepts and some tools from performing arts to create compelling data visualization and analysis. So as Jennifer mentioned, I do research on emerging technologies at Avanade. I'm also a certified playwright, whatever that means, and I have a background in various performing arts, including acting and dance.
And I'm Diana Wolfe. I have the privilege of working with Cristy at Avanade for emerging technology research. I'm a PhD student in IO psychology, and my background is in performing arts theater and visual arts. Today's story we will unfold in a plot structure. So I would like to start by reviewing the purpose. We'll then get into the narrative representation of data and how we've defined that. We'll then talk about the 5-act structure, relevant improv methodologies that you can use as tools for your data visualization and analysis, and then we'll reflect. So performing arts and data analysis. We think that there's a relationship here that is worth exploring. So when presenting findings, we think that data scientists engage in a creative process where we're converting statistical outcomes into a cohesive story, often trying to describe abstract things in quantitative ways is one step, but then taking that quantitative knowledge and creating a story that compels and elicits emotions and engages your audience is very important. You can do that through both analysis and visualization and presentation. These are the ways that we can leverage performing arts. So the intersection of these two disciplines can help data scientists to develop imaginative and intentional components in their representations.
So let's talk a little bit about narrative representation of data. And I'm going to start by really going into the Wayback Machine. And if we ground this discussion in the Western ideas of performing arts and theater, really theater was the way that information was contextualized and carried on. So there are a couple of plays that I'm going to refer to throughout the course of this presentation that you may have familiarity with. The first is Oedipus Rex. And so Oedipus Rex is a play that comes to us from the Greek tradition of plays that tragedies were really intended to help audiences internalize and understand an important lesson or an important thought about their life. So in Oedipus Rex, the main idea is you can't escape your fate. And as we're talking about ancient Greeks, one of the OGs for playwright analysis and construction is Aristotle. And one of the ways that we feel that performing arts, while at first glance may not be directly related to visualization, but actually share a common root, is this idea of spectacle. And Aristotle defines spectacle as everything that relates to the sensory effects. And so the visual of what we see on this stage is very important to conveying that story to us in a way that impacts us and stays with us throughout time. So we'll talk about how that idea of visualization and spectacle is alive in both performing arts and in data visualization. The other play really quickly that I'm going to refer to very often is Hamlet. So again, I'm assuming you're somewhat familiar with Hamlet, but these traditions are very steeped in times, or these particular plays are steeped in times when the tradition was oral. So we're in a new dynamic era of communicating through text and picture that is represented without that oral presentation. Improv theater is a modern instantiation of drama that uses the same structures as scripted plays, but in a very pared back way. And so the interesting thing about applying tools from improv to visualization is that within improvised theater, the actors themselves are responsible for creating the visual elements. And they do that through text and through story and through their own behavior. And so again, just to I just wanted to ground us in this idea of why narrative structure that we see and the tools that we find in performing arts can be extremely relevant to what we're doing when we are working with data. And so specifically, there are two key concepts that we're going to explore with you today. It's going to be a lot of information, so please do ask those questions. Also, we don't expect you to remember all of this stuff. If there's one thing that you remember that's helpful to you, that's going to be really exciting for us. And so we're going to talk you through the 5-act structure, which you've probably come across before. It's a very well-known idea. And then we're going to talk a little bit about a tool from improv called Color or Advance that can help with some decision making as you're going through the process.
I'll now begin explaining the 5-act structure. So the 5-act structure is the methodology that's used to analyze or create story structure and generate a plot. Prior to the 5-act structure, we had the 3-act structure, which is your beginning, middle, and end. When we break it into 5 acts, there are specific actions that occur during those acts. So the first act is going to be your prologue. It's your world building, where you generate your characters and setting. Then you have a rising action that occurs across acts 2 and into act 3, culminating in the climax. So the rising action, you're starting to understand the problems. The climax is the problem has occurred, which is the pinnacle of tension in your play. And then from that point, you have falling action, where this is the consequences of the climax. And then we go into our resolution, where the tone and moral and the message is being conveyed. And if you've done data visualization or had to present your findings before, you can see how this occurs as you have had to share this. And the way we want to leverage the 5-act structure is to create intentionality as you go through this, and to create a process of understanding the narrative that you're generating, allow you to reflect on what should be occurring as you go through it. We are going to talk about it from both a visualization and a data presentation, because actors going to act. So we're going to go ahead and do that as we walk through.
So the first beat of any play is the exposition. And so this is where the audience is really invited into the world and starts to understand some of the rules of the world, the characters, the place. And this is also where the central conflict is introduced. So in Hamlet, this is the scene where Hamlet actually talks to the ghost. Because not only have we established at this point that Hamlet's been a student forever, so we know he's not super decisive, he's been away from home for a long time. Also, we know his father's dead, there's political upheaval, and the conversation with the ghost introduces the primary conflict that drives the rest of the play, which is the request for vengeance. And so we're literally setting the stage in the exposition.
And as you start your process of analysis, you want to understand the context that the data set exists in. You identify those important variables, and then you introduce the problem being solved. As we walk through the 5 acts, we pulled an example from our own research body, which is our MTech Emerging Technologies Index. So that would be our setting. It's a report that's designed to help stakeholders understand emerging technology trends across multiple dimensions. We had 700 C-level participants. They were surveyed across 6 industries and across 7 countries. The conflict or problem we were addressing specifically for this example is which of the following technologies has your enterprise tested or adopted? And the characters or our variables would be emerging technologies, testing, and industry.
So now that we have our stage set, we go through a process of rising action. So this is where complications start to arise, and it creates tension as we build up towards that climactic moment. So in Hamlet, examples of this are his interactions with Ophelia, the way he murders Polonius, the way he brings the players in to stage the scene. These are all complications and surprises and unknown things that are introduced that increase the tension as we work towards that climactic moment.
And then we elaborate on the problem being solved and the hypotheses that we have. We ensure that our data is cleaned, so we're understanding more of the texture with which we are going to be creating the climax. And we start with a basic analysis of the data. So we're really recounting on what's going on, understanding the terrain, getting entrenched in that. And in our example, we're saying that companies are investing at higher rates with some emerging technologies and not others. We need to understand trends in emerging technology adoption by industry to be able to serve our clients and better in those sectors. If you listen to that, that is tension that's being built. There's a reason why we're building towards this. And so we want to then look for surprises in our data, find things that stand out to us.
Absolutely. So each of these are beats that happen. They don't necessarily have to take a whole lot of time or a specified amount of time. And these contradictions and insights, and this is really the meat of it. This rising action leads us to the climax. And the climax in a play is the moment when the rising action, the conflict that has been built up, is resolved. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's an action point. So in Hamlet, it might be tempting to say that the climax is the final scene when, spoiler alert, as Diana said in the chat, everybody dies. But the actual climax is the aha moment. It's the moment when Hamlet actually makes the decision to go ahead and avenge his father, as he's been asked to do.
And so we're going to articulate on those points of tension and the insights in our data. We're going to show the hypotheses or assumptions, and we're going to reveal a visualization to our stakeholders during this climax. If you look at it, we've been talking about it. We've set the stage. Here's our characters. They've all shown up. Here's how they've played out. Here's where the tension has come. And we now have the information of what the conflict or what the problem is that has been presented to us. And we're able to then articulate visually. And then as we're presenting to our data to people, we want to be able to make it very clear to them. And as we do that, we'll leverage the falling action portion of the 5-act structure.
So again, the climax is that moment where the decision is made. The falling action and the resolution or denouement are the pieces that come after that help tie everything up. Plays and presentations and stories are not like real life in that we get closure and we are able to pull together and explore the consequences of everything that led up to that moment.
We want to be able to explain the visualizations we've created, clarify any unknown dimensions that have occurred, and create multiple visualizations if we need to elaborate on that relationship that we're explaining. So it's when you really start to play with your visualizations. And there are 3 acts before it that have given you the context and your understanding and your grounding for what you're trying to say. But it is notable that if you try to jump ahead to your visualization and your falling action, it's going to look unbelievable or uncontextualized to your audience. So if you set up that falling action, acts 1 through 3, you ground those events, it becomes real. The emotional consequences are present for your audience. And so when you present your findings, you want to walk them through the outcomes with the visualizations you've created and provide that catharsis or that relief from the tension to the problem you described earlier.
And the denouement or the resolution is really, this is the final step, right? In Hamlet, Fortinbras comes in and takes over and we have a complete story. So this is the button on the end of it. And the intention here is to, again, bring it home, because whether you're talking about a play or whether you're talking about data, we are trying to affect our audience. We are trying to make change in our audience in some way. And so the resolution is the last moment that we have to recap and to really bring home what we want them to remember.
Yes. And here we want to say, if we're looking at visualization, what's the most important message you want your audience to take away from this visualization? And a hint here is to rehearse. Ask someone that's unfamiliar with your data set, unfamiliar with your visualization or problem, and ask them what they get from that. And then if you're presenting, make sure you reiterate those key findings to your audience. Next, we have an example of what our outcome was. This is what we ended up generating from this process. And as you look at this, you can see the elements of the 5-act structure already at play. We set the stage with the pandemic. That is a variable. It is the setting. It is the context. We talk about the problem that occurs. And so we create this rising action. We create the exposition that we need.
And then we generate through the tension, we get to the climax, which in this case is the thing your eye first goes to, right? You travel through, you get the understanding of what am I looking at? What am I looking at? Oh, 2 times, and then this bar chart. That is very clear. It's the hero of our story. It's the climactic moment where I now have the catharsis of understanding and seeing in a visual way, using that spectacle to really bring home the fact that emerging technologies are rapidly being tested and adopted. And then following, as Western readers, following the path of the eye on the right-hand side of the page, we have that falling action and resolution with what's the takeaway? What can I do with this? So that on one page, we have kind of a complete bite of this mini story within a larger report. And as we talk about like outcomes and how things look, and I loved the word that Diana used earlier, which is rehearsing. Obviously, we went through many iterations of that draft before we hit publish. There were lots of ways to rehearse that data. We can also learn from the craft of improv, which does not rehearse in the same way. Improv actors do rehearse. They rehearse using specific tools and processes, but they don't rehearse a specific script. So again, if we think about creating a story, creating a narrative ad hoc, there's got to be something you can rely on. And there are a ton of tools that improv has generously shared with communication considerations in corporate America and elsewhere. But the one that I love and I think is most specific here to data visualization and presentation is color and advance. So this is a way to think about as you're going through your data, am I going to color or am I going to advance? So what do we mean by that? Well, when we say color, we mean literally, if you think about a coloring book, we're coloring in the image. So we've created not just the bones of the story in improv, but we're adding additional detail. And so we're making it contextualized so that it comes to life in our audience's mind. So the example that we have here is you might add contextual information like demographics to a variable that you're looking at so that you can better understand and get the whole picture of what your data is telling you.
And when we talk about advance, as a researcher and PhD student, I can appreciate the moment where you need to then advance the story. Color is where you gather all those rich, wonderful details. And when you're starting the research process, you can really dig into that, and it's an exciting time. But knowing when to transition to advance is very, very important for executing the final task, because if we didn't, then we would never really progress past our opening scene. So we want to make sure that we're looking for areas to advance the story in important places where we're looking for the logical consequences from our findings, the connecting variable, the novel insight that we're generating. So in the process, it means that you need to be honest with yourself when analysis isn't enough is enough. And that can be hard to do, especially as we are very often passionate about what we're looking into and the processes around them. So if we feel that a data set has more to tell us, we also need to make sure that the insights we share are timely and actionable. And advancing can be used in identifying 2 or 3 of those top insights and elaborating on them, or providing suggestions for addressing any present obstacles that may be occurring.
So to recap, to go over our plot, we talked a little bit about the purpose of why we're here, why narrative representation of data is deeply grounded in some of the same considerations and needs and processes as the performing arts. We introduced you to some more detail on the 5-act structure and some improv methodologies. And we're now at our reflection. Because really, all the world's the stage.
To reiterate, the way that we have decided to tell stories historically is no different than the way that we can tell stories presently with the tools that we have, with the way that we have evolved our storytelling and information gathering. And that is what a story is. It's a way of passing information. and we see very little difference between the two of them. So making sure that you pay attention to how you're structuring your story as you visualize and then articulate your data is going to be very important to making it effective and impactful for audiences, as it has done before and will continue to do.
Yeah, and we hope somewhere in here there's a tool or two that makes that a little simpler for you.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for the talk. We'll now transition to questions and answers. I'll get the questions started. We have one from Rebecca Grolman. When you're timing a presentation, how long should you spend in each act?
That's a really great question. There's a couple of resources that will tell you the length of which act or how long the acts generally are. I believe the shortest ones are your climax and your resolution acts. And the longest ones are very generally the first two acts, because you're really building that context in for the consequence. And then I would put the falling action at like a mid-level. The detail that you need to get from that will mostly already have been created in the rising action and world building or generation of setting.
Yeah, it's like so many things, it can depend. I really, like Diana said, just to kind of underscore, the climax is typically in and of itself a quick moment, and then you want to get on to wrapping up. One other thing is when thinking about timing, you can also play with the structure a little bit. So if you listen to the Moth podcast, or if you ever go to live storytelling, they actually often start with the second act and then go into the first act as a way to land you in the middle of the story, so that it doesn't feel like you're on this predictable climb, but so that you are emotionally engaged from the beginning. The important part to keep in mind is you're building that tension. And so you do want to allow for enough time to do that. Now, as for like, does that mean that's 5 minutes or 3 minutes? That's where the rehearsal process comes in. And if you can find multiple audiences that are naive to your topic, they'll be able to help you understand where it feels a little bit long or where it feels kind of unearned.
That's great. I really love that idea of finding people that are naive to your topic to see how it lands with them before you do it. I think that's super important. I have a question about like when you're in the middle of your presentation. I mean, in this type of venue, it's difficult because you can't see the people on the other side of the screen. But when you're speaking in front of an audience, like what are tools and techniques that you can use to like kind of read the room and figure out how to revive sections or whatever if you seem to be losing the crowd?
Oh, that's another great question. And it's really hard because with presentations like this, the people who are the most engaged might actually be the most still, right? They might like just be sitting and thinking. And so like, I don't know, I've performed for so long. I feel like it's almost a sense that I have of just kind of the breathing in the room, but that's not a very helpful thing to share. Yeah, I guess if you have the opportunity to build in a feedback mechanism along the way, then that can help you gauge where people are more involved. But that can be difficult, especially with timing. Great question.
Definitely. And leveraging some of those improv tools we talked about. If you are going through the process of articulating your findings and you feel that you're losing the audience, or that part of the story needs to change to relate to the audience more, yeah, you can really make that decision if you need to color or advance. Are you losing the audience because you've given too much detail? Or have you not given enough detail that it's not relevant to them yet? It hasn't really become salient to them why this should be important, and maybe we need to color a bit more.
Okay, we have maybe time for one more question really quick. So what are your thoughts on interactive data visualizations? How best do you think they fit into this narrative framing?
That's a really great question. I love interactivity. Sorry, what?
45 seconds.
I love it because it allows the audience to create their own story. So I think as you're building the interactive elements, you keep in mind that all of those pieces need to be there. Then what you're doing is you're allowing the audience to determine their own path through those elements, but they still need to be there. And real quick, I'm going to try to answer one other question I saw in the chat, which is you don't have to break it down by all 5 acts, but you will find that at least the 3-act structure is generally present within any kind of presentation or story.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your great presentation today, Cristy and Diana. This concludes our session. If you have additional questions for our speakers, you may send them a direct message in Excel events. We look forward to seeing you in the next sessions.